At 6:17 on a rainy Tuesday morning, I unlocked a front door I wasn't supposed to know existed. 30 seconds later, I was standing in a marble foyer staring at a silk robe hanging on a staircase railing. It wasn't mine. The coffee mug on the kitchen island wasn't mine either. Neither was the framed photo of my fiancé Ryan Mitchell with his arm wrapped around a blonde woman I'd never seen before. For a moment, I honestly thought I had walked into the wrong house. Then I saw Ryan's watch sitting on the counter. The same watch I'd bought him for his 43rd birthday. That's when my stomach dropped. I wish I could tell you I handled it gracefully, that I immediately understood everything and calmly walked away. The truth is, I stood there frozen while rain tapped against the giant windows overlooking Lake Norman. 8 years. 8 years together. 8 years building a future with a man I thought I knew. And suddenly I was standing inside a mansion that proved I didn't know him at all. My name is Linda Parker. I'm 38 years old, and at the time I was 3 months away from marrying one of Charlotte's most successful CEOs. Or at least that's what I thought. The strange thing is that I hadn't been looking for evidence of cheating. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't checking his phone. I wasn't following him around. That morning started like any other Tuesday. I got up around 6, fed my golden retriever Daisy, and made coffee. Ryan was supposedly in Nashville meeting with potential logistics partners. At least that's what he'd told me. I worked as an interior designer, mostly residential projects around Charlotte and the Lake Norman area. I had a client meeting scheduled later that morning, and I was looking through a filing cabinet in my home office for insurance paperwork. That's when I found an envelope. The address caught my attention. I didn't recognize it. Normally I would have ignored it. But Ryan was usually obsessive about paperwork. Seeing an unfamiliar property attached to his name felt odd. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe a rental property. Maybe an investment. Maybe an office space. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. By 7 o'clock, curiosity got the better of me. I put on a rain jacket and drove north. The address led me to a gated neighborhood near the lake. Expensive homes. Large lots. Private docks. The kind of place where successful executives bought second homes. When I reached the property, the gate was open. I remember thinking that was strange. Then I parked and walked right in. The house looked lived in. Fresh flowers sat near the entrance. A white Mercedes was parked in the garage. Music played softly somewhere upstairs. Nothing felt abandoned. Nothing felt like an investment property. It felt like someone's home. Then I found the photographs. One on a bookshelf, another on a side table, another beside the bed. Ryan and the woman, smiling. Vacation photos, birthday dinners, Christmas decorations. The timeline was impossible to ignore. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-night stand. This was another life. I sat on the edge of a guest room bed and stared at the carpet for what felt like forever. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Part of me wanted answers. Part of me wanted to call him immediately. But another part, the quiet part that people don't talk about enough, already knew the answers. I didn't need an explanation. The evidence was everywhere. I eventually walked back downstairs. Near the kitchen island sat a framed picture that hit me harder than everything else. Ryan and the woman were holding champagne glasses. Behind them was a Christmas tree. I looked closely. The photo had been taken 2 years earlier. 2 years. At that point, I wasn't discovering an affair. I was discovering a parallel relationship. The rain had gotten heavier when I finally left. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes before starting the engine. Then I drove home. The entire drive felt unreal. Traffic lights changed. People filled gas stations. A school bus stopped near a neighborhood entrance. The world kept moving exactly as before. Meanwhile, my future had collapsed before breakfast. Around noon, Ryan called. His name appeared on my phone exactly as it always had. Ryan. For a second, I considered declining the call. Instead, I answered, "Hey, sweetheart." His voice sounded relaxed. "Normal. Hi. You sound tired. Didn't sleep well?" "Sorry to hear that. Meetings all day. I'll call later tonight." I looked out the window. Daisy was sleeping on the patio. The rain was finally slowing down. "How's Nashville?" I asked. A brief pause. "Busy." That one word told me everything. Because Ryan wasn't in Nashville. Ryan was 40 miles away in a mansion with another woman. And he lied so smoothly I wondered how many times he'd practiced. We talked for another minute before ending the call. Afterward, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. No crying. No screaming. No broken dishes. Just silence. The wedding invitations had already been mailed. The venue had been booked for months. Our friends were excited. Our families were excited. Everything was moving toward a future that no longer existed. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and stared at our engagement photos. The photographer had captured us laughing beside a lake at sunset. Looking at them now felt like looking at strangers. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply tired. As evening approached, I poured myself a glass of wine and called the one person I trusted completely, my best friend Karen. She answered immediately. "Everything okay?" I took a breath. "No." A long pause followed. Then she said quietly, "What happened?" I looked across the room at our wedding binder sitting on the bookshelf, and for the first time I spoke the truth out loud. "Ryan has another woman." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Then Karen said something that would change everything. "Linda, before you do anything emotional, promise me you'll think this through." At the time, I thought she was telling me to save the relationship. I had no idea she was preparing me for something much bigger. Something that would begin with a plane ticket and end with Ryan losing far more than his fiancé. Karen arrived at my house that night with Thai takeout and the kind of expression people wear at funerals. She set the food on the kitchen counter and hugged me so tightly I almost broke apart right there. "I drove past the bakery on the way here," she said gently. "Your wedding cake display was still in the window. That did it. Not the mansion, not the photos, not even Ryan's lie about Nashville. A stupid 3-tier vanilla cake with sugar flowers nearly made me cry." Karen handed me a napkin and sat beside me at the table. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I stared at the untouched pad thai. "I don't know. Part of me wants to call him and demand answers. Part of me wants to pretend I never saw anything. And the third part," I looked at her. "The third part wants to disappear for a while." Karen nodded slowly like she'd expected that answer. The next few days passed in a blur of practical decisions and emotional whiplash. I canceled the florist first, then the caterer. Then the string quartet Ryan insisted we hire because he thought live music made him look sophisticated. The venue coordinator sounded stunned. "Linda, the wedding is in 12 weeks. Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. My voice barely sounded like mine. At night I lay awake replaying 8 years of memories searching for clues I'd missed. The business trips. The late meetings. The weekends he claimed he was exhausted from work. The way he'd gradually become protective of his phone. None of it had seemed alarming at the time. Love has a strange way of explaining things away. Ryan called constantly. Sometimes cheerful, sometimes concerned, sometimes annoyed that I sounded distant. I kept my responses short. "I've been busy. Design deadlines. Not sleeping well." He accepted every excuse because he assumed I was still orbiting around him. That was Ryan's biggest blind spot. He never imagined I would leave quietly. A week later, I drove to Atlanta to see my father. Thomas Parker was 71, sharp as a tack and impossible to intimidate. He'd built Parker Capital from a tiny investment office into a respected private equity firm. Growing up, I used to joke that my father could smell bad business decisions through walls. Ryan always found him intimidating. Now I understood why. We sat on the back porch overlooking the Chattahoochee River, while my father drank black coffee and listened without interrupting. I told him everything. The mansion, the photos, the lies, the canceled wedding. When I finished, he stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Linda." I swallowed hard. "Did you know?" He looked at me carefully. "I knew Ryan liked appearances too much." "That's not the same thing." "No, it isn't." The late afternoon sun reflected off the river while cicadas buzzed in the trees. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me. "Why did you invest in his company if you didn't trust him?" My father set his coffee mug down. "Because you trusted him." That answer hurt in a different way. Not because it was wrong, but because it was honest. Ryan's logistics company had struggled badly 6 years earlier. Banks wouldn't extend more credit, and several investors backed out. My father stepped in with a major investment that kept the company alive. Ryan always told people he built the business through sheer grit and determination. Technically, he left out the part where my family's money kept the lights on. "How much control do you still have?" I asked. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. "Enough." That one word hung in the air between us. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. The following week, I booked a flight to London under the excuse of attending a design conference. The conference was real. I just didn't particularly care about it anymore. What I wanted was distance. Charlotte felt suffocating. Every restaurant held memories. Every street reminded me of wedding plans. At Charlotte Douglas Airport, I sat near gate D12 with a carry-on suitcase and a knot in my stomach so tight I could barely breathe. I almost turned around 3 different times. Once while boarding was delayed. Once after Ryan left me a voicemail saying he missed me. And once when I saw an older couple laughing together over airport coffee. 8 years isn't just time. It's habits, shared jokes, family holidays, favorite restaurants, knowing how someone takes their coffee. Walking away from that feels less like a decision and more like cutting off a limb. During the overnight flight, I barely slept. I reread old text messages like they belonged to someone else. One from 3 years earlier said, "Can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you." Another, "You're my safe place." I stared at those words for so long my eyes burned. At one point, I almost opened my laptop to book a return flight. Maybe we could talk this out. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe people make terrible mistakes and recover from them. Then I remembered the Christmas photo in the mansion. 2 years. Not one mistake, a sustained deception. By the time the plane landed at Heathrow, exhaustion had replaced most of my panic. Passengers shuffled through customs while I moved on autopilot. The airport smelled like coffee and wet coats. Outside London was grey and drizzly in that familiar British way. I checked into my hotel near Kensington, dropped my suitcase on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone. My father's contact sat at the top of my favorites list. I hesitated. This was the point of no return. Once I made the call, things would move quickly. Business doesn't wait for emotional processing. Finally, I pressed dial. He answered on the second ring. "You landed safely?" "Yes." A pause. Then I said the sentence that would change everything. "Dad, pull every dollar." Silence. Not shocked silence. Not confused silence, measured silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "I've been waiting for this call." I closed my eyes. The weight of that statement hit me immediately. "You knew this might happen." I hoped it wouldn't. Outside the hotel window, a red double-decker bus rolled through the rain. My father continued, "Linda, I stayed out of your relationship because you were an adult making your own choices. But I never believed Ryan valued loyalty the way you did. I didn't know whether to feel comforted or angry. Maybe both." "What happens now?" I asked. "He loses the safety net he thought would always be there. And if the company survives, then it survives. This isn't about revenge through destruction. It's about no longer protecting someone who betrayed you." That distinction mattered more than I expected. My father wasn't talking about sabotaging Ryan illegally or vindictively. He was talking about withdrawing support, about consequences. After we ended the call, I sat alone in the quiet hotel room. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt shaky. Because despite everything, I still loved the version of Ryan I thought existed. Letting go of that illusion hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. My phone buzzed again. Another missed call from Ryan. I turned it face down on the nightstand and looked out at the rain-soaked London street. For the first time in 8 years, my future was completely uncertain. And strangely enough, that uncertainty felt more honest than the life I'd been planning. I woke up the next morning in London to 17 missed calls. 15 were from Ryan. 2 were from unknown numbers. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. Outside my hotel window, people hurried along Kensington High Street carrying umbrellas. A delivery truck was unloading boxes. Someone was walking a golden retriever that looked remarkably like Daisy. Normal life continued. Meanwhile, something significant had apparently happened back home. My phone rang again. Ryan. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, another call came through. Then another. Then a text. "Call me now." I put the phone down and walked to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. If you'd asked me 6 months earlier whether I could ignore Ryan Mitchell, I would have laughed. For years, I'd been the person who answered every call, every text, every crisis. Now I ordered coffee and scrambled eggs and watched London wake up. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I listened to the voicemail. "Linda, something's happening." Ryan sounded stressed. Really stressed. "Our investors are asking questions. Parker Capital just withdrew support. Nobody's telling me what's going on. Please call me." I deleted the message. Then I listened to the next one. This time his voice sounded sharper. "Did you talk to your father?" Delete. The third voicemail sounded different. Fear. Actual fear. That one I listened to twice. Not because I enjoyed it. Because I'd never heard Ryan sound vulnerable before. The man was famous for confidence. Employees admired him. Investors trusted him. Reporters loved interviewing him. Now something was cracking. Around lunchtime, Karen called. Unlike Ryan, I answered immediately. "Tell me everything." Karen laughed. "I figured you'd want updates." "What happened?" "Your father pulled funding yesterday afternoon." I nodded. I know. Well, apparently that wasn't the only thing. What do you mean? Karen lowered her voice dramatically. You know how investors get nervous when one major investor leaves? Of course. Let's just say people started asking questions. I sat down on a bench near Hyde Park. The air was cool and damp. What kind of questions? The kind that make executives sweat. Apparently, once Parker Capital withdrew support, other investors began reviewing company finances more carefully. Nothing illegal had been discovered, at least not yet. But confidence was evaporating. And confidence was everything. Ryan's company had grown fast. Very fast. The kind of growth that depended on people believing the future would be bigger than the present. Once doubt entered the room, things changed. How bad is it? I asked. Karen whistled softly. Pretty bad. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt oddly numb. Maybe because the reality hadn't fully caught up with me yet. Maybe because part of me still couldn't reconcile the man I'd loved with the man who'd lied so effortlessly. That afternoon, I visited a museum. I tried to focus on something other than Ryan. Ancient paintings. History. Anything. But my phone kept buzzing. News alerts. Messages. Voicemails. The situation back home was escalating faster than anyone expected. Then something happened that completely changed the story. Around 6 o'clock London time, I received an email. The sender's name made me stop walking. Brooke Sanders. The woman from the mansion. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. My first instinct was anger. My second instinct was curiosity. I opened it. The message was surprisingly short. Linda, I think we need to talk. There's a lot you don't know. And trust me, there's a lot I didn't know either. Brooke. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. Finally, against my better judgment, I replied. 30 minutes later, we were on a video call. The woman on my screen looked tired. Not smug. Not defensive. Just exhausted. She appeared to be sitting in the mansion's kitchen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I never expected. I'm sorry. I blinked. What? I'm sorry. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know about you. I stared at her. That made no sense. We've been engaged for 8 years. She nodded miserably. I know that now. The conversation that followed completely upended everything I thought I knew. Ryan had told Brooke he was divorced. Not separated. Not complicated. Divorced. According to her, he'd shown her an apartment he supposedly rented after ending his marriage. He claimed his ex-wife lived in another state. He'd even invented stories about a painful divorce. The more she talked, the more ridiculous it sounded. And yet somehow she'd believed him. Just as I'd believed countless other lies. For nearly 2 hours, we compared timelines, photos, messages, trips, excuses. The overlap was staggering. At one point, Brooke laughed bitterly. Not because anything was funny. Because it was absurd. Do you know what he told me last Christmas? What? He said he had to spend the holiday with investors. I almost laughed too. Almost. Instead, I shook my head. Last Christmas, he told me he was helping a client through a crisis. We looked at each other. Then both started laughing. Real laughter. The kind that happens when reality becomes too ridiculous to process normally. It felt strange. Here I was talking to the woman I'd imagined hating. Instead, we were comparing notes like survivors of the same scam. Before ending the call, Brooke said something else. Something important. There's more. What do you mean? She hesitated. Then she began sending documents. Bank statements. Expense reports. Emails. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing them. What I discovered had nothing to do with romance. And everything to do with Ryan's character. He'd been spending company money recklessly. Private travel. Luxury purchases. Questionable expenditures disguised as business expenses. Not criminal, but deeply irresponsible. Enough to alarm investors if they ever looked closely. And now they were looking. The next morning brought another surprise. A former employee contacted me through LinkedIn. Then another. Then another. Apparently word was spreading. People had stories. Stories about Ryan taking credit for others' work. Stories about promises he never kept. Stories about employees pushed aside when they became inconvenient. The picture forming wasn't flattering, but it was revealing. For years I'd viewed Ryan through the lens of love. Now I was seeing him through everyone else's eyes. That afternoon Karen called again. She was laughing so hard she could barely speak. Okay, she said between breaths. You need to hear this. What happened? Ryan went on a business podcast this morning. I frowned. Why would he do that? Apparently he thought it would reassure investors. That sounded exactly like Ryan. What did he say? Karen burst out laughing again. He spent 20 minutes talking about how strong the company is. Okay. Meanwhile, local business reporters were discussing funding concerns in real time. I covered my face. Oh no. Oh yes. Apparently the podcast host had no idea what was happening. Ryan confidently described future expansion plans, while social media exploded with speculation about the company's financial stability. The clips quickly went viral around Charlotte's business community. For the first time, I felt something close to amusement, not because people's livelihoods were involved. That part genuinely worried me, but because Ryan's greatest weakness had always been arrogance. He believed confidence could solve every problem. Sometimes confidence works. Sometimes reality wins. That evening, I sat alone in a small cafe near my hotel. Rain tapped softly against the windows. People chatted quietly around me. My coffee had gone cold. And for the first time since finding the mansion, I understood something important. Brooke wasn't the villain. The employees weren't the villains. The investors weren't the villains. Ryan had spent years building a fragile world held together by image and deception. Now the image was cracking, and what emerged from underneath wasn't someone I recognized at all. Then my phone buzzed. A new voicemail from Ryan. This time there was no anger, no confidence, no control, just desperation. And listening to it, I realized the worst part of his downfall hadn't even started yet. 3 days later, I flew back to North Carolina. Not because I missed Ryan, not because I wanted closure, and definitely not because I wanted another explanation. I came back because something much bigger was about to happen. Ryan had announced a public investor meeting at a hotel in uptown Charlotte. Officially, it was meant to reassure stakeholders. Unofficially, everyone knew he was trying to stop the bleeding. The company's situation had become the talk of local business circles. Financial reporters were asking questions. Investors were nervous. Employees were worried. And Ryan was scrambling. Karen picked me up from Charlotte Douglas Airport on a warm Thursday afternoon. The moment I got into her SUV, she shook her head. "You are not going to believe this." I've heard that phrase a lot lately. No, seriously. She merged onto I-485. Ryan keeps telling everyone this is a temporary misunderstanding. I laughed. A misunderstanding? Apparently. She glanced at me. He's still pretending everything's under control. That sounded familiar. Ryan had always believed presentation could solve reality. If a problem looked manageable, maybe people would assume it was manageable. For years it worked. Now the cracks were too visible. That evening I met Brooke in person for the first time. We chose a quiet restaurant in South Park. Neutral territory. Neither of us knew what to expect. The situation could have been awkward. Instead, it felt strangely normal. She arrived wearing jeans and a navy sweater. Nothing glamorous. Nothing dramatic. Just a woman who looked as exhausted as I felt. When she sat down, we stared at each other for a second before laughing. "This is weird," she said. "Extremely." The waiter brought menus. Neither of us looked at them. For the next 2 hours we talked. Not about revenge. Not about humiliating Ryan. About the lies. The manipulation. The countless small deceptions we'd both accepted because we trusted him. At one point, Brooke shook her head. "The worst part is that I actually felt sorry for him." I nodded. So did I. That realization hurt. Neither of us had been foolish. We'd simply believed someone we loved. Before we left, Brooke reached into her purse and handed me a folder. "I think you should have copies." Inside were emails, financial records, and messages she'd collected. Nothing illegal, but enough to expose a pattern. A pattern of dishonesty. And patterns matter. The investor meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. By noon, the ballroom at the Charlotte Marriott City Center was packed. Investors, managers, employees, reporters, industry analysts. The atmosphere felt tense. People spoke quietly. Phones buzzed constantly. Everyone seemed to sense something important was about to happen. Karen sat beside me. Brooke sat 2 rows behind us. Several former employees were scattered throughout the audience. None of us coordinated anything dramatic. We simply showed up. Ryan walked onto the stage at exactly 1 o'clock. Perfect suit. Perfect haircut. Perfect smile. For a brief moment, seeing him triggered something painful inside me. Memories. Habits. Old emotions. 8 years doesn't disappear overnight. Then he began speaking, and the feeling vanished, because the man on stage wasn't being honest. He wasn't addressing concerns. He wasn't acknowledging reality. He was performing. "Our company remains exceptionally strong," Ryan announced confidently. A large presentation screen displayed optimistic projections. Future growth. expansion plans, revenue forecasts. The audience listened politely, at first. Then the questions started. An investor stood up. What impact has Parker Capital's withdrawal had on liquidity? Ryan smiled. We have numerous funding options. Another investor raised her hand. Can you provide details? The smile tightened slightly. The room noticed. Then a financial analyst asked about unusual expenditures. Ryan gave a vague answer. Another question followed, then another. The pressure steadily increased. For the first time, his confidence appeared strained. I watched from my seat while years of carefully managed image began colliding with reality. The turning point came when one of the former employees stood up. His name was Mark. He'd worked for Ryan for nearly 7 years. His voice remained calm. Professional. Respectful. Can you explain why several operational concerns raised internally were ignored for over a year? The room went silent. Ryan's answer wasn't convincing. People sensed it immediately. Then another former employee spoke. Then another. Each question exposed another inconsistency. Nothing explosive. Nothing outrageous. Just facts. Documented facts. The kind that accumulate over time. The kind that become impossible to dismiss. Reporters started typing furiously. Investors exchanged nervous glances. Ryan's polished presentation was falling apart. And then Brooke stood up. The room shifted instantly. Most people didn't know who she was. Ryan did. The color drained from his face. For the first time all afternoon, he looked genuinely frightened. She spoke clearly. No yelling. No insults. No theatrics. My name is Brooke Sanders. The ballroom became completely silent. She continued. For 3 years, Ryan told me he was divorced. A ripple moved through the audience. He wasn't. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. Every word landed heavily. Brooke calmly described the deception. The false stories. The fabricated details. The double life. Again, nothing dramatic. Just truth. And truth can be devastating. Ryan attempted to interrupt. Brooke kept speaking. The audience listened. Then someone turned toward me. A reporter. I recognized her from a local business publication. She approached quietly. Are you Linda Parker? I nodded. Would you like to comment? For a second I considered declining. Then I stood. Every eye in the room seemed to follow me. My heart pounded. Not from fear, from sadness. Because despite everything, I never wanted this version of Ryan to exist. Yet here we were. I looked directly at him. Then I addressed the room. My name is Linda Parker. A few people already knew. Most didn't. I was supposed to marry Ryan in 3 months. Silence. He and I were together for 8 years. I paused. He maintained a separate relationship during that time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I continued. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. That was true. I came because honesty matters. The room remained completely still. Employees deserve honesty. Investors deserve honesty. The people who trusted this company deserve honesty. Ryan stared at the floor. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. Not powerful. Not impressive. Just small. And that's when I understood something. This wasn't revenge. Not anymore. Revenge implies causing harm. What I was watching was accountability. The difference mattered. Questions continued for another hour. More information surfaced. More inconsistencies emerged. The meeting eventually ended in chaos. Not screaming chaos. Business chaos. The kind that happens when trust evaporates. Investors left frustrated. Reporters rushed to file stories. Board members held emergency discussions. And Ryan stood alone near the stage. No audience. No applause. No control. Karen and I headed toward the exit. Halfway there, I turned around. Ryan was still standing there. For a moment, our eyes met. He looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe apologize. Maybe explain. Maybe blame someone else. I didn't stay long enough to find out. Some conversations come too late. Outside, the late afternoon sun reflected off Charlotte's glass skyscrapers. The city moved normally around us. Cars honked. People crossed streets, restaurants filled with customers. Life continued. But behind us, the carefully constructed image Ryan had spent years protecting was finally gone. And this time, nobody could rebuild it for him. 6 months later, I was standing in my backyard on a cool October morning drinking coffee while Daisy chased squirrels across the grass. For the first time in a very long time, my life felt quiet. Not perfect. Just peaceful. And after everything that had happened, peaceful was enough. The maple trees behind my house had started turning orange and red. A few leaves drifted across the patio while the local morning news played softly through the kitchen window. The anchor briefly mentioned a logistics company acquisition. Ryan's former company. I listened for a moment, then turned the volume down. That chapter was over. A lot had changed in 6 months. The board had removed Ryan as CEO less than 3 weeks after the investor meeting. Officially, they cited leadership concerns and declining confidence. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. Trust had disappeared. Without trust, leadership becomes almost impossible. A few months later, the company was sold to a larger competitor based in Texas. Most employees kept their jobs. That mattered to me. Those people had mortgages, families, college tuition payments, and retirement plans. They didn't deserve to suffer because one executive believed rules applied to everyone except himself. As for Ryan, I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. Not because I asked. Small cities have a way of sharing information whether you want it or not. Apparently, he moved into a condominium outside Charlotte, much smaller than the house we'd once planned to share. Several former friends distanced themselves. A few business relationships disappeared. His reputation took the hardest hit. Success can survive mistakes. It struggles to survive dishonesty. The strange thing was that I didn't feel happy about his situation. Relieved, yes. Satisfied that consequences finally arrived. Absolutely. But not happy. There was a time when I genuinely wanted Ryan to succeed. A time when I believed we'd spend our lives together. You don't erase 8 years overnight, even when those years end badly. One afternoon, about 2 months after the investor meeting, I received an email from him. The first direct contact since everything happened. I stared at it for several minutes before opening it. The message was surprisingly short. No excuses, no justifications, no attempts to win me back. Just a simple apology. A real one. At least it seemed real. He admitted he'd lied. He admitted he'd hurt people. He admitted he'd spent years chasing admiration instead of earning respect. I read the email twice. Then I closed it. I never responded. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left to say. Some conversations don't need endings. They simply stop. Around that same time, my own life started moving forward in ways I hadn't expected. For years, my interior design work had taken a back seat to Ryan's career. His meetings, his schedule, his ambitions. Without realizing it, I'd slowly organized my life around someone else's goals. After the breakup that changed, I launched my own design consulting business. A smaller operation. Just me and 2 employees. Nothing flashy. No giant office. No expensive branding campaign. Just work I genuinely enjoyed. The funny thing, business was good. Really good. Clients appreciated honesty. They appreciated reliability. Apparently those qualities were rarer than I'd realized. My father loved reminding me of that. Speaking of my father, our relationship changed too. Growing up, I'd always viewed him as successful but intimidating. The kind of man who solved problems while everyone else was still figuring out what the problem was. After everything happened, I started seeing him differently. Not as an investor. Not as a businessman. As a father. A father who had watched his daughter make a painful mistake and respected her enough to let her learn from it. We began having dinner together twice a month. Nothing formal. Usually barbecue restaurants or small local diners. The kind of places where nobody cared about investment portfolios. One evening while eating peach cobbler at a restaurant outside Atlanta, I asked him something I'd been wondering for months. Dad, he looked up. Yeah, when you said you'd been waiting for my call, what did you mean? He smiled slightly. Exactly what I said. I laughed. That's not an answer. He set down his fork. I knew eventually you'd see who Ryan really was. The statement wasn't cruel, just honest. What if I never had? My father thought about it. Then he shrugged. Then I'd have continued supporting your decisions. That answer stayed with me, because real love doesn't control people. It supports them, even when they're wrong. A few weeks later, I met Karen and Brooke for lunch. Yes, Brooke. If you'd told me a year earlier that we'd become friends, I would have thought you were crazy. Life has a sense of humor sometimes. The 3 of us sat outside a restaurant near Lake Norman overlooking the water. At one point, Karen raised her iced tea. To surviving terrible men. Brooke laughed. I laughed. The waiter looked confused. None of us explained. The truth was Ryan unintentionally gave us something valuable. Perspective. Not the kind you want. The kind you earn. The kind that arrives after disappointment and forces you to reevaluate everything. As the months passed, I found myself thinking less about betrayal and more about lessons. Not dramatic lessons. Simple ones. Pay attention when actions don't match words. Trust your instincts. Don't confuse potential with character. And maybe most importantly, never build your entire future around someone else's promises. Build it around your own values. One chilly evening in late October, I took Daisy for a walk around my neighborhood. The sun was setting. Children were riding bicycles. Neighbors were decorating for Halloween. Ordinary life. The kind of life I used to overlook while chasing a future that looked impressive on paper. Standing there watching orange light settle across the street, I realized something. The biggest loss wasn't Ryan losing his company. The biggest loss wasn't the canceled wedding. The biggest loss would have been spending another decade with someone who never truly valued honesty. And the biggest victory wasn't revenge. It was freedom. Freedom from lies. Freedom from excuses. Freedom to build a life that actually belonged to me. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved because trust was broken, you probably understand how complicated that feels. Painful endings rarely arrive with neat answers, but sometimes they create space for better beginnings. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If it resonated with you, feel free to share your own experiences. You never know who might need to hear they're not alone.